Good morning, everybody. It's time for our final session before lunch, and it's my pleasure to introduce my twin brother, Dr. Cedric Vine. We were born on the same day, 8 minutes apart, and I wasted those 8 minutes. I did nothing productive during them. Then he caught me up when he was born. My twin brother, Dr. Cedric Vine, he's a New Testament professor here at Andrews. Previously, he taught at Newbold in the United Kingdom for many years, and prior to that he was serving with his wife in a pastoral district in the North England Conference in the city of Derby, where Rolls-Royce engines are made. And during his years in ministry, my twin brother has really developed a love for the New Testament, and in particular the Gospel of Matthew. And today he's going to be sharing with us from Matthew 23 on the topic of the discipleship ideal within Matthew chapter 23. So it's my pleasure to introduce you my friend and twin brother, Cedric.
When he introduces me, but that was relatively good. Can you hear me? Okay, let's... Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, the purpose of this paper, well, let me just start just by showing you the passage that I'm going to be talking about today. It's from Matthew 23 and verse 34. This is in the section on the woes, and let me read it. Verse 34, "Therefore I send you prophets, sages, and scribes, prophetas, kai sophus, kai grammates, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some of whom you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town." And it carries on. The purpose of this paper is to explore Matthew's discipleship ideal through the lens of Matthew 23:34. By discipleship ideal, I refer to that gospel character or characters whom Matthew intends to function as the primary topos for readers to imitate. Investigations into the nature of Matthean discipleship have typically focused on Matthew's emphasis as a redactor, the disciples or characters, or on discipleship-related languages. Can I switch to this one? Okay. In Matthew 23, Jesus addresses a series of 7 sharp woes against the scribes and Pharisees. He criticizes their legal judgments in matters of oaths and tithing. Their external cleanliness and internal greed mark them out as full of lawlessness. Not only have they failed in matters of law, but they honor the prophets while taking part in the shedding of their blood. They reflect their ancestors as the descendants of those who were prophet murderers. They both misjudge the law and persecute the prophets. Davies and Allison note that the 7 woes, which start with halalkic disagreements and culminate in the murder of God's messengers, mirror the plot of the whole gospel, in which religious disputes lead to Jesus' death. In this context, Jesus states that he will send them prophets, wise men, and scribes, some of whom they will kill and crucify, some of whom they will flog in their synagogues and pursue from town to town. Jesus will send alternative leaders to those of the scribes and Pharisees. It is the thesis of this paper that this mixed group of prophets, wise men, and scribes represents Jesus, or Matthew's, discipleship ideal. Note that we are not dealing here with 3 separate concepts of discipleship. Rather, we are dealing with a united but varied group that combines 3 different roles. A reader familiar with the Old Testament will be quite aware of individuals who combined multiple roles. Moses was a lawgiver and prophet. By the time of Philo, he had expanded his brief to be that of king, lawgiver, high priest, and prophet. Samuel combines the roles of priest and prophet. Jeremiah was a priest and prophet aided by the scribe Baruch. Those who opposed him included a mixed multitude of priests, wise men, and prophets. You read that in Ezekiel or Jeremiah 17:17. In later traditions, Jeremiah was viewed as a new Moses, someone who upheld the law. Ezra was a priest and scribe. By the late 1st century AD, he was also remembered as a prophet. Read that in 4th Ezra. David Auner notes that from their first appearance in our sources, Israelite prophets such as Samuel, Elijah, and Elisha combined the characteristics of the holy man, the sage, the miracle worker, and the soothsayer. By the 1st century AD, the distinctions between what might have originally been distinct roles have become thoroughly blurred. David Orton observes, for example, that scribes assimilated other functions, frequently replacing the prophets. To quote him, thus Targum Jonathan to Isaiah 9:15 renders the prophets who teaches lies as the scribe who teaches lies. False prophets equals false scribe. Similarly, for Isaiah 3 verse 2, the judge and the prophet taken into exile are in the Targum the judge and the scribe. The priest and the prophet who reel with strong drink in Isaiah 28:7 become the priest and the scribe. A parallel assimilation of literary genres occurred, resulting in a blurring of the distinction between law, prophecy, and sapiential literature. This process cautions us against seeking to overly distinguish between the prophets, wise men, and scribes envisaged by Jesus in Matthew 23:34. It is not my purpose to define these three different roles. Rather, my purpose is to demonstrate the significance of Matthew 23:34 in delineating Matthew's discipleship ideal. That takes me on to the disciples as poor examples. For much of Matthean scholarship, the disciples represent the members of a Matthean community in conflict with formative Judaism. In such readings, the evangelist's portrayal of the disciples serves to legitimate the community's identity and stance towards non-community members. Implicit within such readings is the assumption that the disciples reflect the community's situation and provide a template or typos for the community to imitate. I have argued elsewhere that such readings are selective in their use of the text, in that they tend to emphasize the positive characteristics of the disciples while deftly skipping over their multiple failings. Other scholars, usually from a narrative critical perspective, have argued that the disciples function as a model of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Terence Donaldson, for example, states, within the story of Jesus, the disciples function primarily as a model of what is involved in being a member of Jesus' people. Readers of Matthew's Gospel learn what it means to be a disciple by following the disciples' own story under the narrator's guidance. That is, in identifying with them, in learning from their successes and failures, and above all, in joining with them as they listen to Jesus' teachings." End quote. In broad brush terms, the story of the Matthean disciples is one of a good start, a so-so middle, and a bad ending. Now, I'm not going to go through the next section because you're familiar with the gospel. Basically, it starts with the calling of the disciples. They respond with faith. They are the object of Jesus' teachings. And then slowly, as you go through the gospel, they exhibit faith and lack of faith until